It's April 2019. The hype is unreal. People are lining up for midnight showings, avoiding spoilers like their lives depend on it. And Marvel fans everywhere are acting like this is the cinematic event of a lifetime. And in a way, it was. Avengers Endgame wasn't just a movie, it was a global phenomenon. The culmination of over a decade of interconnected storytelling, packed with nostalgia, callbacks, and, of course, that epic final battle. It was the perfect send-off. Or was it? Fast forward a few years, and the conversation has started to change. Some fans have begun questioning if Endgame was really as groundbreaking as we all thought. Was it truly a masterpiece of storytelling, or were we all just caught up in the moment? Did we overhype Avengers Endgame? First, let's talk about what Endgame did right. There's no denying that it was an incredibly ambitious film, wrapping up 21 movies, delivering satisfying conclusions to multiple character arcs, and making $2.8 billion at the box office. That's impressive no matter how you look at it. The emotional payoffs were massive. Tony Stark's final sacrifice, Steve Rogers finally getting his dance, Thor's unexpected depression arc. These were moments that hit hard because we spent years getting to know these characters. The I Love You 3000 scene, pure emotional devastation. And of course, who could forget the moment Captain America wielded Mjolnir? That single shot had theaters erupting worldwide. But here's where the cracks start to show. Once the dust settled, once the emotional high wore off, people started asking questions. And, oh boy, there are some questions. For starters, let's talk about time travel. The MCU had spent over a decade establishing rules, logic, and continuity, only for Endgame to throw that all out the window. Unlike Back to the Future, where changing the past alters the present, Endgame introduces a confusing concept of branching timelines that the movie itself barely seems to understand. If changing the past doesn't affect the future, why was Steve Rogers able to live out his life in the past and still show up in the present? And let's not even get started on how Thanos was conveniently able to time jump to 2023 without Pym particles when everyone else needed them. Then there's the pacing. Endgame's first act is essentially a slow-burn drama about grief, which on paper is a bold and compelling choice. But let's be real. Did anyone expect to see a movie where the Avengers just kind of sit around depressed for an hour? Sure, it makes sense narratively, but it also meant that on rewatch, a significant portion of the film feels like a slog. And then there's the time heist. What should have been a fun, thrilling ride through MCU history often felt more like an extended clip show. The handling of certain characters was also, let's say, questionable. Take Thor, for example. Thor Ragnarok had done an incredible job of revitalizing his character, giving him depth while still making him fun. Endgame, however, turned him into a joke. The concept of him dealing with grief through self-destruction was interesting, but instead of exploring it with the nuance it deserved, the movie turned it into endless fat jokes. And let's not even get into how Hulk, one of the most powerful characters in the MCU, was completely sidelined for most of the movie, reduced to comic relief. This is the guy who spent 2 movies wrestling with his identity, and his payoff is taking selfies with kids and barely contributing to the final battle. Speaking of the final battle, let's be honest, it's a visual spectacle, but is it really good storytelling? The entire third act is essentially fan service, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it does raise the question: was Endgame's climax earned, or did it just rely on nostalgia and crowd-pleasing moments? Captain Marvel, who was built up as one of the most powerful heroes, does almost nothing except randomly appear, punch a spaceship, and then disappear. The all-female hero lineup moment? It looked cool, sure, but it felt like it was thrown in for applause rather than actually serving the story. And Thanos? The terrifying villain from Infinity War is reduced to a generic, I just want to destroy everything bad guy. Then there's the issue of the snap itself. Infinity War built up the stakes in a way that made it feel like a genuine gut punch. Half of all life was gone, and we had to sit with that loss for a year. But in Endgame, all of that is reversed in a way that, while emotionally satisfying, also feels a little too easy. The heroes don't actually have to deal with the long-term consequences of what happened. Sure, there are some references to how society is struggling, but by the end of the movie, it's basically business as usual. And then we come to the ending. Tony Stark's death was a fitting and powerful moment. But Steve Rogers' decision to stay in the past? That one divided fans. On the one hand, it's a sweet ending for him, giving him the life he always wanted. On the other, It kind of goes against everything we knew about Steve's character. This is the guy who constantly put duty above personal happiness. The guy who literally fought against government oversight because he believed in doing the right thing no matter what. Would he really just abandon the present and live a quiet life while his friends continued to struggle? So, where does that leave us? Did we overhype Endgame? Well, yes and no. There's no denying that it was an incredible cinematic event, an emotional roller coaster that delivered some of the most iconic moments in superhero movie history. But once the initial excitement wore off, its flaws became much more apparent. The messy time travel logic, inconsistent character arcs, and over-reliance on nostalgia make it a movie that, while still enjoyable, doesn't necessarily hold up as well as it did on first viewing. Ultimately, Endgame is less of a perfect film and more of a perfect experience. It was designed to be a grand farewell, a celebration of everything the MCU had built up to that point. And in that sense, it absolutely succeeded. But was it the best superhero movie ever made? Was it a flawless masterpiece? Not quite, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day, Endgame gave us something that no other movie had before. It gave us closure. And in a franchise built on never-ending sequels, that's a pretty rare thing.